Good morning. I am Arthur Gonzalez, the Chair of the Financial Oversight and Management Board for Puerto Rico. I would like to welcome everyone joining us today for the Oversight Board's 51st public meeting at the Puerto Rico Convention Center. I'd also like to take a moment to welcome a troop of Boy Scouts here with us today. Again, as I said, welcome. I hope you enjoy your stay. To begin the meeting, I would like to start with a roll call to formally determine if we have a quorum. Dr. Andrew Biggs.
He was on there.
Dr. Biggs, I believe, is present online.
I am present.
Oh, thank you, Andrew. I am present myself. Mr. John Nixon.
Present.
Thank you, John. Dr. Betty Rosa.
Presente.
Thank you, Betty. I know that the governor is on her way, and she should be here shortly. So we will begin. We have a quorum, and the meeting is now called to order. First, I would like to ask our General Counsel, Mr. Jaime Ocore, if he would be willing to act as secretary for this meeting. Thank you, Jaime. I'd like to thank all government officials joining us today, as well as everyone here in the audience and on the live stream of this meeting via Oversight Board's website, www.oversightboard.pr.gov. Headsets for the audience members who prefer a Spanish simultaneous translation are available at the registration desk. The live stream of this meeting is also available in English and Spanish. If you log into the English language website, the audio will be in English, and if you log into the Spanish website, you will hear the simultaneous translation. Additionally, the meeting is translated into sign language. Audience members will have the opportunity to ask questions at the end of the meeting. Answers to the questions and comments that have already been submitted online will be answered on our website. Answers to the question from previous meetings have been posted. We have the following agenda items for today. Approval of the meetings of public meeting and executive sessions of the Oversight Board. 2, administrative matters. 3, update by the Executive Director, Robert Mojica. Remarks from Governor Jennifer Gonzalez Colon. 5, Fiscal Year 2027 Commonwealth Budget Overview by the Oversight Board's Budget Management Director, Elisa Guardiola, and Executive Director of Puerto Rico's Office of Management and Budget, Orlando Rivera Berrios. Update on the government's Enterprise Resources Planning Project by the Governor's Chief of Staff, Francisco Dominiche. Other matters, and last, number 8, adjournment. The first order of business is to vote on approving the minutes of our last public meeting, which was held on February 25th, 2026. The minutes are attached to the meeting material as Appendix A. We also vote on approving the minutes from the executive sessions held since public meeting on March 13th, 2026, March 27th, 2026, April 17th, 2026, and May 8th, 2026. The minutes of the executive sessions are attached to the meeting material as Appendix B. Are there any questions about the minutes? There being no questions, do I have a motion to approve the minutes?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to move to approve the minutes of the last public board meeting and the minutes of the executive sessions held on March 13th, 2026, March 27th, April 17th, and May 8th, all of 2026.
Thank you, John. Do I have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Betty. I would like to ask for a voice vote. First, all those in favor?
Yes.
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 Yes. Any opposed? All of the members present having voted in favor, the motion passes and the minutes are approved. Next, we have a couple of administrative matters. Would someone make the first motion?
Mr. Chair, I'd like to make the following motion. Between adjournment to this meeting and the opening of the Oversight Board's next public meeting, the Oversight Board may consider an executive session any and all matters it is authorized to consider under PROMESA, including first, any certification determinations authorized by PROMESA, including certification determinations under Section 206 of PROMESA. Second, any submissions or authorizations authorized by PROMESA. And third, any filings authorized under Title III of PROMESA in each case that are set forth as part of the vote to convene such executive session. The Oversight Board may also act by unanimous written consent between meetings in accordance with this bylaws, with such consent to include consent by electronic transmission.
Thank you, Andrew. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Thank you, John. Would all in favor please say yes?
Yes.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All right, the motion passes. Welcome, Governor. Thank you very much for being here. All board members having voted in favor, the motion passes, as I said. We have one more motion which relates to unanimous written consents. Would someone make that motion?
Mr. Chair, I move to confirm and approve any unanimous written consents adopted by the Oversight Board since the adjournment of our last public meeting, which are attached to the meeting materials as Appendix C.
Thank you, John. Do we have a second?
Second.
Thank you, Betty. Would all those in favor please say yes?
Yes.
Yes.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? All of the members present having voted in favor, the motion passes as well. We'll now move to the substance of today's public meeting. I will open the floor to our Executive Director, Robert Mojica, for an overview of the Oversight Board's work since our last public meeting. Mr. Mojica, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair Gonzalez. The period since our last public board meeting was dominated by the Commonwealth budget, the process to develop a budget, and budget reform. What was accomplished over these last months marks an important milestone in the work of the Oversight Board and the implementation of PROMESA's mandate, providing for a method for Puerto Rico to achieve fiscal responsibility and access to the capital markets. At the Budget Transformation Symposium we convened last month, I said it plainly. Restructuring Puerto Rico's debt was the precondition for fiscal recovery, but not fiscal recovery itself. Oversight by the board alone cannot sustain that recovery. That requires permanent reforms that institutionalize how Puerto Rico plans, spends, and accounts for public funds. Since our last meeting, we worked together to develop a budget compliant with the fiscal plan for the Legislative Assembly to review and approve, and we worked with the government on substantial legislation that represents the first steps toward the structural budget reforms Puerto Rico needs. A statutory framework for responsible budget management that most governments take for granted and that Puerto Rico never had. We mapped the new framework based on best practices, principles, and guardrails that U.S. state budget directors generally see as essential. We discussed this framework during a Better Plan Symposium for Puerto Rico's fiscal future, convened by the Oversight Board, in which the government also participated in and collaborated on. We collaborated with the National Association of State Budget Officers, and 5 budget directors help us create a roadmap to achieve this standard of governance for Puerto Rico. The discussions made clear that meaningful reform depends on strong institutions, reliable data, and sustained collaboration. Every state represented at the symposium has wrestled with the same fundamentals: how to forecast revenues honestly, build reserves against uncertainty, plan capital investments strategically, and make reforms stick across administrations. Puerto Rico is doing that work now. Lasting reforms must be written into law as statutory framework that outlasts legislative terms and political changes. The fiscal year 2027 budget and the first set of legislation to improve the budget process are milestones on this path to completing the recovery of Puerto Rico, and that started the enactment of PROMESA. When the board is gone, Puerto Rico will need these institutions standing on their own. On May 7th, Governor González Colón introduced legislation to establish permanent fiscal safeguards for Puerto Rico's budget, a budget stabilization fund, a capital fund, and 5-year financial plan. These are measures the Oversight Board has long advanced and that the government and the Oversight Board have worked together to develop over many months. This is the first step in a series of structural budget reforms that are needed to permanently institutionalize fiscal responsibility for Puerto Rico, the kind of framework that prevents governments from spending money they do not have, borrowing to cover deficits, and arriving at a crisis without reserves to protect their people. This is critical legislation. When Puerto Rico fell into recession, the government could not tap into reserves to buffer failing revenues. Instead, it borrowed. When Hurricane Maria hit, the people of Puerto Rico, the government of Puerto Rico had no reserves to protect its people. At that point, it could no longer borrow. In addition to the long-term stability that this legislation will provide, it will also be critical as part of the work to fulfill PROMESA's second mandate, the mandate of restoring access to the credit markets. Strong reserves are a foundational credit strength and a prerequisite to restoring fiscal credibility with investors. Reserves provide liquidity, protect against revenue volatility, absorb economic shocks, and reduce the need for disruptive cuts, tax increases, and short-term borrowing during economic downturns. Weak or declining reserves undermine confidence, and rapid reserve depletion can materially impair efforts to re-enter the markets on sustainable terms. Rating agencies also evaluate whether governments understand their structural challenges, aligning recurring revenues with recurring expenditures and avoiding chronic reliance on one-time solutions. Further, rating agencies look for multi-year capital plans and evidence that infrastructure investment is being managed strategically. Puerto Rico currently has no sustainable long-term capital funding framework, so once the federal disaster dollars expire, there is no plan. That is a structural vulnerability that grows more serious with each passing year. The legislation that Governor González Colón introduced will codify all of this. The stabilization fund, the capital framework, and the multi-year financial plan is a statutory foundation that transforms one administration's discipline into permanent obligation for every administration that follows. The Oversight Board also approved the governor's $554 million tax rebate, paid for from funds initially set aside to cover potential revenue shortfalls under Act 52 of 2022 that were not needed because Act 52 revenues exceeded projections, and reductions in prior year extensions for planned spending that will not be executed. One-time tax reliefs without permanent structural reforms would have signaled that Puerto Rico has not institutionalized the changes necessary to prevent a return to the practices that drove the fiscal crisis. The actions taken this month show taxpayers, rating agencies, and the capital markets that Puerto Rico has the fiscal discipline to do both, deliver meaningful relief today and build reserves that protect the people of Puerto Rico tomorrow. We also look forward to engaging with the government on longer-term tax code restructuring. Puerto Rico's tax system has not been comprehensively modernized in decades, and making it more competitive and growth-oriented is a priority for the Oversight Board that the Oversight Board and the government share. That work is ahead of us and is important. Over the last months, we have been working with the administration of Governor Jennifer González Colón to develop a budget for the coming fiscal year, 2027, which begins on July 1. Under our co-leadership process we discussed in previous board meetings, this is a different budget process, reflecting the transfer of accountability and responsibilities for fiscal and budget matters from the Oversight Board to the government. We focus less on deadlines and more on dialogue. on the right conclusion and decision, and sometimes that path takes a bit more time. The formality that Promesa established was critical for Puerto Rico to regain stability. Deadlines for fiscal plan submissions and for developing responsible budgets were important elements of establishing a process that could and did lead Puerto Rico out of fiscal crisis. Puerto Rico is in a different place today. Today, we can build on the accomplishments we achieved together in recent years, and that I believe allows and perhaps even demands new ways of applying Promesa's mandate. The formality that was essential to establish stability now gives way to a kind of sustained partnership that turns stability into permanent institutional strength. So this year, the governor's team took the lead in submitting a compliant budget to the Legislative Assembly last Friday. This does not mean that our oversight has lessened, but the fiscal year 2027 budget is substantially the governor's budget, not the Oversight Board's budget. Our Budget Management Director, Elisa Guardiola, and the Director of Puerto Rico's Office of Management and Budget, Orlando Rivera Berrios, will present the budget in more detail today. As usual, the lion's share of spending is allocated to essential services: education, public safety, health, and retiree-related purposes. The government decided to reduce spending in certain areas, particularly payroll and operating expenses in some agencies, to make room for additional funding in priority areas, including salary increases for police officers and correction officers and the Department of Education. That process that got us here was based on our mutual goal to get to the best outcome possible with flexibility and teamwork. Of course, there were heated phone calls and meetings, no change there. But as the former budget director for one of America's largest states, I can tell you frank conversations and tough talk are part of any budget process. The main point is this: we got to a good place, a place that is further ahead on our path to a new, solid, and responsible budget process than where we were last year and 2 years ago. The budget is now with the legislature, and the Oversight Board is ready to engage in an equally productive process to help the governor's budget through the legislative process and to certification by you, members of the Oversight Board. Further, the Oversight Board and the government have aligned on the applicable guidelines regarding the development of budgets in accordance with modified accrual accounting standards. This is a milestone, a Promesa statutory requirement that is now within reach of fulfillment. Discussions are now focused on resolving implementation details in the coming weeks to ensure compliance and to address any potential exceptions or areas of non-compliance. When this budget is certified as developed under modified accrual accounting standards, we have fulfilled a statutory Promesa mandate that has been years in the making. In addition to the Commonwealth budget, we are in the process of reviewing the budgets for other covered entities that have already had their debt restructured under Promesa, but some of which continue to balance their budgets using non-recurring revenues as a result of failing to fully implement fiscal plan measures required of them. This practice is not sustainable and is inconsistent with their certified fiscal plans. That work continues, and we look forward to certifying those budgets as well in accordance with the modified accrual standards required under Promesa. We also published the financial report for the current fiscal year's second quarter, which ended on December 31st. The Oversight Board's quarterly fiscal reports are not predictions of Puerto Rico's future fiscal state, but rather a snapshot of relevant data at a point in time when what the reports can show is a change or continuation of trends. What we see in the second quarter report is continued stagnation of Puerto Rico's economic growth. Tax revenues continued at that time under a downward trend. Second quarter year-to-date general fund revenue was slightly higher than fiscal plan projections, but lower than collections in the same period a year earlier. That decline from the previous year's tax revenue is relevant because it guided the current budget process. It is the main reason why the budget for fiscal year 2027 remains consistent with fiscal year 2026 levels, reflecting economic uncertainty. We are currently analyzing the data for the third quarter report, and what I can share today is personal and commercial income tax revenue declined from the same period a year earlier, but we also received tax revenue numbers for April. And though the decline is no longer as steep as we had seen in the third quarter, the data still shows that revenue growth, that does not show revenue growth year over year, but more flat revenues continue. We expect to publish the third quarter financial report shortly. The government submitted a regulation that would establish for the first time a comprehensive, uniform, and binding normative framework governing all compensation decisions for career and trust service employees, covered under the Government of Puerto Rico Human Resource Administration and Transformation Act, or Act 8 of 2017. For more than 4 decades, the government of Puerto Rico operated human resource management systems that had not kept up with the times. Salary structures in many agencies dated back to the 1990s. Compensation practices were fragmented across agencies, which each entity administering its own job classifications, pay scales, salary setting conventions. The same job performed in 2 different agencies could carry materially different compensations. The result was a public workforce that did not benefit from the uniform, merit-based treatment that the state envisioned, and the compensation environment had drifted substantially below the local labor market across job families. We are in the final stages of reviewing this new legislation, which would codify the compensation pillar of the reform into a single binding normative framework that could bookend the civil service reform the Oversight Board developed and implemented over the last 4 years, together with the current and the previous administrations. Together with the government and the Office of Management and Budget and the Department of Education, we are also advancing fundamental change to how Puerto Rico funds its public schools, the transition to student-based budgeting. Under this approach, each school's budget is built from the students it serves with funding that reflects each student's actual needs. Funding should follow the student transparently and consistently. This change is overdue, and the data makes the case. Between fiscal year 2017 and fiscal year 2026, the Department of Education's general fund budget grew by 18%, while student enrollment declined by 37%. Federal pandemic relief funds, which more than doubled the department's budget at their peak, expired in fiscal year 26, the current fiscal year. And within the system today, similar schools receive very different funding, not because of student needs, but because of the current allocation method does not begin with the student. This is not fair to students, and it's not sustainable for the government over the long term. So the Oversight Board has worked with the government, school directors across Puerto Rico, education not-for-profits, charter operators, and budget officials from U.S. school districts to develop a new funding formula. The new fiscal year 27 budget began incorporating some of these new estimates for the first time. The next step is to finalize a regulation that would give the student-based budgeting framework the force of law so that the next budget could be developed entirely under a student-based budgeting framework. I also want to address permitting reform, an issue the Oversight Board has identified consistently across every fiscal plan since 2017 as a fundamental barrier to economic growth. Puerto Rico's permitting system has long been considered an obstacle to investment and development. The process is time-consuming, involves multiple agencies and extensive documentation, and creates incentives to circumvent it altogether. Every year that reform is delayed is a year of investment that does not come and jobs that are not created, and economic activity that does not materialize. The good news is that permitting reform is now moving through the legislature, and what is under review is promising. A version of meaningful permanent reform appears achievable. That matters, not just as a practical step to remove a barrier to doing business, but because the Oversight Board's fiscal plans had projected that the ease of doing business reforms, including permitting, can add meaningful trajectory to Puerto Rico's economic climate. We are watching this legislation closely, working with the government, and we encourage the legislature to act. On PREPA's debt restructuring, the Oversight Board continues to interact with the mediation team and believes a mediated consensual resolution of remaining disputes in PREPA's Title III case is possible. However, given the bondholders' continued court action, litigating for the full recovery of $12 billion while proposing no path forward beyond that litigation, it is unlikely that PREPA's bankruptcy will be resolved this year. The U.S. District Court's ruling on the administrative expense claim was a significant win for the Oversight Board, but certain bondholders have already appealed that decision. The Oversight Board has proposed that the most efficient next phase would be litigation to determine the value of the bondholders' collateral and thus the allowed amount of their secured claim. This is the path to a resolution that reflects Puerto Rico's fiscal and economic reality. The Oversight Board was also successful in limiting the bondholders' demand for discovery. In April, bondholders argued that they are entitled to PREPA's historical accounting records for calculating PREPA's net revenues, documentation on federal reimbursement funds, and other documents. And in May, the court largely rejected the bondholders' request for broad historical accounting-related documents and set a narrow discovery schedule, with summary judgment briefing to be completed in November. That is the work since our last board meeting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Mojica. I will now open the floor to any questions or comments by board members.
Only to comment that it's been a busy couple of months.
That was from page 2, John. Thank you, John. All right, any other comments? All right, thank you again, Robert, for the very extensive and comprehensive presentation. But I would, excuse me, I would like now to turn the floor over to Governor Jennifer Gonzalez Colon, who would like to make some remarks. Welcome again, Governor.
Thank you, Chairman, and good morning to all of you. And thank you to Mr. Mojica and members of the board. The period since the last public meeting has been one of the most productive of my administration, and today I will report on that progress and lay out what comes next. Early this month, I introduced 2 pieces of legislation to establish permanent fiscal safeguards for the first time in Puerto Rican history. Executive Director Mojica just talked about them. This legislation is establishing a new statutory budget stabilization fund, a true rainy day fund as part of the fiscal year of the fiscal 2027 budget. This fund replaces the existing unfunded budget stabilization fund that has not been capitalized since 2008 and will be funded with a target of 13.5% of the general fund budgeted expenditures. Capitalization will begin immediately with an initial deposit of $729 million throughout this fiscal year. The second legislation established a dedicated capital fund to finance recurring infrastructure and other capital projects. And for the first time, capital investment will be structurally separated from the general fund operating expenditure, a standard practice in the states that Puerto Rico has lacked. And early this month, with the board's agreement, we announced the Cheque Para Ti, a $554 million direct payment to Puerto Rican working and middle-class taxpayers. This is not new spending. These funds were fully identified through existing reserves. These measures are the product of many months of collaborative work between the board and my fiscal team. The fiscal discipline my administration has exhibited, and I am pleased that the board has publicly stated its support for it. Since August of last year, the OMB and FAF has been working with the Oversight Board on the collaborative development of the fiscal year 2027 government budget. As I shared with you before, for the first time since the creation of the board, the government of Puerto Rico is leading the budget and fiscal processes. PROMESA Section 209 required 4 consecutive balanced budget developed in compliance with modified accrual accounting standards as a condition for the board's termination. Starting with the fiscal year 2026 budget, and now with the fiscal year 2027 budget, we are well underway to complete this requirement under PROMESA. And we are also advancing in the implementation of the inherited contract government ERP system, with the finance module scheduled to go live on July the 1st, aligned with modified accrual principles. The other two modules, personnel and purchase transactions, will go live during the first half of 2027. The validation of this collaborative work came on May 15, when the Oversight Board, by unanimous written consent of all its members, approved the proposed fiscal year 2027 Commonwealth budget as a compliant budget under PROMESA Section 202C, and submitted it to the state legislature. I want to thank Mr. Mojica and his team for the collaborative spirit they have brought to this process, as well as the commitment of my fiscal team led by OMB and FAF. The fiscal discipline is the foundation on which we are building real, sustained economic growth, and the most recent data confirm that the strategy is working. General fund revenues as of March 31st are running approximately 4% above the Department of Treasury forecast in sales and use tax received. The clearest indicator of household consumption are running 3.6% above the same period in fiscal year 2025. These figures reflect our families are spending, that our businesses are selling, and an economy moving in the right direction. Looking at March and April of this year, revenues are comfortably outperforming the forecast. 3 consecutive months of revenue growth over the same period year months, and employment at a 17-year high. To validate all this, on March 5th, Moody's published a report acknowledging this progress. The past 15 months have generated over $2.6 billion in new manufacturing plant investment and the creation of more than 5,000 jobs across the island. We're also advancing comprehensive permitting reform, removing barriers and modernizing processes, because attracting investment is not enough if doing business in Puerto Rico remains unnecessarily complicated. On the energy front, I want to begin with a development of major significance. On May 8, the U.S. District Court for the District of Puerto Rico remanded the government's lawsuits seeking to invalidate the extension of Luma Energy contract back to Puerto Rico's local courts where they belong. The court held that the government claims fall within the exception to Section 306D of PROMESA, and that the issues raised are required by the contract itself to be litigated in the Puerto Rico local courts. This is a decisive on the board took a position. We respectfully disagree. But now the Title III Court has resolved that question. Litigation proceeds, the work of transforming Puerto Rico's energy sector continues without interruption. The Partnership Committee overseeing the competitive RFP process for 3,000 megawatts of new permanent generation capacity has been working diligently over the past few months to ensure this process is done in the right way and efficiently. This week, the committee held hearings with proponents, an opportunity to rigorously examine each proposal, moving us closer to a final determination that will deliver this significant new generation capacity to Puerto Rico by this summer end. The federal policy environment continues to evolve, and my administration is engaging proactively. Throughout the multi-sectoral Medicaid task force we established, which got several meetings, in developing contingency plans and strengthening our advocacy before Congress. And for the first time, the fiscal year 2027 budget gave us structural tools throughout the risk reserve and the new budget stabilization fund to respond when federal funding arrives. Mr. Chairman, when I appeared before this board in February, I described a year of results across the fiscal, economic, and energy fronts. 3 months later, the picture is even stronger. We have introduced historic legislation to establish permanent fiscal safeguards that the oversight itself has called the right step in the right direction. And we delivered the jointly developed fiscal year 2027 budget that was approved by the Oversight Board as compliant budget on May 15. During the next weeks, we will be working together with the Oversight Board and the legislature to make sure that the budget is approved in a balanced and fiscally responsible manner, so it can become the second certified balanced budget under PROMESA. I thank the members of the board, the Executive Director Mojica, and the entire Oversight Board team for their continued partnership with my administration. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Governor. Would any board member or Mr. Mojica like to comment on the governor's remarks?
Mr. Chairman, I would like to just thank the governor for her leadership on these fiscal reforms. I think that it's been a pleasure working with her. She understands the importance of implementing these reforms, and I think that while they take a little bit of effort, I think it's a legacy, Governor, that you're going to leave for future generations here on the island and allow the island to work more appropriately. I also want to recognize the effort, of Director Barrios and the team working with our team. I think it's critically important that this transition be occurring, and I'm so pleased this year that the governor took the lead on the budget and her team and put that out. And hopefully, the legislature will pass it, the governor will sign it, and it'll conform to modified accrual, and I fully anticipate that that'll be the case. So I just wanted to thank you, Governor, and just acknowledge the work that's gone into that and the leadership.
Thank you.
No, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you for coordinating the OMB summit here with the best practices from the states. I know you were behind that effort from the Oversight Board, so we really appreciate that.
Yeah, it was a good event, and thank you for showing up and participating in that as well.
All right, anyone else? All right, thank you both. No further comments or questions. I'd like to turn the floor over to Elisa Guardiola, our Director of Budget Management, and Orlando Rivera Berrios, the Director of Management and Budget for Puerto Rico, for an overview of the budget for the coming fiscal year 2027. We will begin with Ms. Guardiola's remarks. Ms. Guardiola, the floor is yours.
Good morning. Good morning, board members, Mr. Mojica, Governor Gonzalez Colon, and everyone joining us today. My name is Elisa Guardiola, Budget Management Director. Thank you for the opportunity to walk you through the Commonwealth Government's fiscal year 2027 general fund budget, as well as the fiscal conditions that inform the government's development of this year's spending plan. When we last met publicly in February, we discussed the historic progress Puerto Rico has made in restoring fiscal discipline. We also discussed the reality that revenue trends were beginning to soften, underscoring the importance of staying vigilant and avoiding a return to unsustainable budgeting approaches. Since then, the government has continued moving the fiscal year 27 budget development process forward, applying the long-term institutional budgeting principles we discussed in February. This includes aligning the budget preparation with the applicable guidelines for development under modified accrual standards. Today's presentation builds on that presentation. I'll focus specifically on the general fund, where the government's decision reflect both the fiscal progress achieved and the risk we must continue to manage carefully, especially as federal funds decline and recurring obligations grow. To help guide our presentation, my remarks this morning will focus on 4 key areas. First, I'll start with the broader context, how the general fund fits within the Commonwealth all governmental funds, and why that matters for understanding the government's fiscal year 27 budget. From there, I'll transition to a discussion of revenue performance and the economic trends that shape the government's decision to adopt a largely flat budget approach this year. Third, I'll highlight several investment and operational risks the government must navigate carefully, especially as federal funds continue to decline and recurring obligations create additional pressures on the budget. And finally, I'll walk through the fiscal safeguards that continue to anchor the long-term strategy and help protect Puerto Rico from future instability. With that context in mind, let's begin. Today's fiscal environment. Thank you. Sí. Let me go back. Sí. Thank you very much. So today's fiscal environment requires thoughtful management. The government is seeing revenue momentum slow after several years of strong post-pandemic performance. Collections have level off, but they are no longer growing, and the broader global outlook remains uncertain. For these reasons, the fiscal year 27 proposed general fund budget submitted last week to the Legislative Assembly is flat. A flat budget is not a sign of weakness. It reflects responsible budgeting by ensuring the government does not commit to recurring spending that current revenues cannot support over time. The 27 General Fund Budget Resolution also incorporated stronger controls for state plan amendments, so changes submitted to the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, CMS, can be evaluated for fiscal impact before they take effect. This increased visibility is critical as the government manages Medicaid costs and other federal programs with substantial local exposure. Before diving deeper, it is important to step back and consider the bigger picture. The legislature reviews only the general fund, which represents just over 40% of the entire all governmental funds budget. The Oversight Board currently reviews special revenue funds separately. In most states, though, it's standard practice for both special revenue and federal funds to be appropriated together as part of a single budget process. Most Commonwealth resources flow through special revenue funds and federal funds. This distinction is especially important this year as the government begins its transition toward establishing a dedicated capital project fund. The recently introduced legislation represents an important first step in modernizing the Commonwealth approach to capital budgeting. A capital project fund will provide a recurring revenue stream for infrastructure increased transparency, and align Puerto Rico with national best practices. It will also help ensure that one-time capital needs are funding with one-time resources is fundamental practice of long-term budget stability. Turning to revenues, the trend is clear. Revenue momentum has slowed. Collections have settled at current levels, and early fiscal year 26 data shows no meaningful growth heading into 27. This reflects both their normalization after the pandemic and broader economic headwinds. Tax reforms remains essential for strengthening the revenue base and supporting economic development initiatives within the special revenue funds. We are currently preparing an updated all-fund forecast to ensure that future expenditures decisions remain tightly aligned with realistic revenue expectations. This environment reinforces the importance of maintaining reserves and strengthening controls to manage volatility in recurring revenues. Given the revenue picture, the fiscal year 27 budget remains essentially flat. This flat posture is a strategic decision. It keeps spending within sustainable levels while meeting government obligations under the fiscal plan. The slight increases in total expenditure is driven primarily by two areas: contributions to the Pension Reserve Trust based on fiscal plan estimates, and Medicaid, which continue to operate at the federal funding gap, meaning any additional costs must be financed 100% locally. At the same time, the government benefits from decreasing in debt service and the expiration of certain non-recurring items that were intentionally limited to a single fiscal cycle. As this time-limited commitment phased out, they free up capacity within the general fund and help maintain overall budget stability. This combination keeps the overall budget stable while meeting critical needs. Almost 68% of the general fund support core services, education, public safety, health, and retirees' obligations. These areas continue to be the foundation of the Commonwealth investment priorities. The fiscal year 27 general fund budget also includes targeted increases in public safety compensation, support for therapy and transportation services in education, and operational support for municipalities. As part of this process, the government adjusted certain budgets to create room for these priorities. It is important to understand that this financial principle naturally leads to year-over-year differences in allocation, and that the recurrent nature of this decision is reflected not only in the fiscal year 27 budgets, but also in the outer years' projections. These adjustments are not only expected, they are essential to ensuring that funds are administered responsibly, aligned with program needs, and managed within the overall limits of the general fund. The central challenge was ensuring that these decisions did not create a structural deficit in future years, a key principle of responsible financial planning and one that underscores the importance of maintaining a credible 5-year financial plan. The fiscal year 27 proposed budget supports several important initiatives, building on the established budget targets across the government's priority areas. In public safety, the government is funding salary increases for police and corrections officers, along with facility improvements and equipment upgrades. In health and social services, the government is supporting Medicaid implementation work, elder and disabled adult care, and childcare initiatives. In education, the government is funding student transportation and therapy services, as well as providing support for public school alliances. For municipalities, the government is allocating resources that help advance service reforms and strengthen local operations. In infrastructure, the government is directing funds toward road improvements, flood mitigation efforts, and critical transportation services. And to build long-term government capacity, the budget includes resources for administrative modernization and for improving forecasting tools that strengthen long-term planning. Together, these targeted initiatives reflect deliberate decision-making in a flat revenue environment and demonstrate the government's commitment to aligning budget priorities with available resources. As we move towards certification, there are several fiscal risks that the government will need to monitor closely. Medicaid costs continue to represent one of the government's largest exposure. Even small changes in federal policy, enrollment trends, or utilization can materially affect local funding needs. Ongoing monitoring of program assumptions and federal guidance remains essential. Variability in tax collection is another key risk. Maintaining conservative revenue assumptions help ensure the government does not overcommit recurring spending. Legislative actions may also require adjustments to the 27 budget. Any new appropriations or policy changes with fiscal impact will need to be evaluated against available revenues and the requirements of the approved budget. The expiration of certain federal funds adds additional pressure, particularly in areas where temporary federal support has supplemented or replaced local resources. As these funds went down, the government must determine which activities can be sustained, reduced, or restructured. Some have been previously built in the budget, but the most significant can affect essential services like education and health. In addition, PREPA's ongoing restructuring process could introduce operational or financial transitions that may affect the fiscal year 27 planning. While the full impacts remain uncertain, it is a factor that requires continued coordination and contingency planning. Together, these risks underscore the importance of maintaining strong reserves, adhering to conservative budgeting principles, and upholding clear fiscal controls. These elements provide the government with the flexibility needed to manage unexpected developments and preserve long-term stability. Fiscal safeguards remain central to the Commonwealth's strategy. Building and maintaining adequate reserves through the Budget Stabilization Fund is essential. Strong reserves gives the government the ability to manage unexpected volatility, such as revenue softening, expenditure pressures, or external shocks without compromising core services. As the government advances the transition to a dedicated capital project fund, it further strengthens fiscal discipline by ensuring that one-time investments are matched with one-time resources. This alignment is a foundational principle of sound capital budgeting and critical to maintaining a sustainable long-term fiscal posture. Finally, the government's 5-year financial plan provides a transparent framework for understanding how today's decisions influence tomorrow's fiscal stability. It serves as a key planning tool that helps agencies and the Office of Management and Budget assess long-term impacts, set priorities, and avoid commitments that could create future imbalances. Together, these tools, the Budget Stabilization Fund, the Capital Project Fund, and the 5-year financial plan, positions Puerto Rico for a more stable and resilient fiscal future. In closing, the fiscal year 27 general fund budget reflects the government's commitment to discipline, transparency, and long-term planning. And while the fiscal environment remains challenging, Puerto Rico is in a stronger position today because of the structure built through years of collaboration between the government and the Oversight Board. As we move forward, we will continue working closely with the executive branch and the Legislative Assembly on the general fund budget, and we will also maintain ongoing conversations with the executive branch on special revenue funds and federal funds. This coordination is essential to ensure that we can certify the government's full all governmental fund budget by June 30th of 2026. At this point, I'd like to transition to the government's budget director, Orlando Rivera Berrios, who will walk us through the administration's priority for fiscal year 27. He will also discuss the changes made during this year's budget development process that strengthen the government's role and allow for a more collaborative, co-lead approach with the Oversight Board. With that, I will turn it over to him to continue the presentation.
Buenos días a todos. Gracias por la oportunidad. Saludo a la gobernadora y gracias también por la oportunidad de estar aquí hoy. Hoy queremos presentarles cómo la Oficina de Gobierno de Puerto Rico, a través de la Oficina de Gerencia y Presupuesto, desarrolló el presupuesto del año fiscal 2027, que gracias al trabajo en conjunto con el equipo de la Junta, se logró someter el 15 de mayo un presupuesto en cumplimiento a la Asamblea Legislativa. La carta emitida por parte de la Junta de Supervisión Fiscal a la Asamblea Legislativa relacionado al presupuesto propuesto para el año fiscal 2027 reconoce el modelo de liderazgo conjunto y la transferencia de responsabilidades fiscales hacia el gobierno. Por primera vez, desde la aprobación de la Ley Promesa, la OGP lideró la planificación y formulación del presupuesto consolidado para el año fiscal 2027. Desde el 2017 he sido testigo, como servidor público de carrera, cómo se ha señalado la existencia de un proceso presupuestario fragmentado. Debido a esto y a otros factores, he sido testigo cómo el proceso presupuestario ha sido liderado y dominado por la Junta de Supervisión y Administración Fiscal. También he sido testigo cómo se ha señalado la falta de visibilidad desde la Oficina de Gerencia y Presupuesto de la ejecución del gasto público. Con el propósito de atender estos señalamientos, en enero del 2025, nuestra gobernadora emitió la Orden Ejecutiva 2025-011, creando un comité interagencial de elaboración presupuestaria, buscando centralizar en la OGP todo el proceso de elaboración presupuestaria. En los primeros 6 meses del 2025, la OGP implementó una herramienta conocida como Sistema de Inteligencia de Datos, la cual nos ha ayudado a monitorear el gasto público, a tener mayor visibilidad, a monitorear los ingresos y en realizar análisis de data histórica. También logramos implementar un manual presupuestario centralizado, donde se logró uniformar e implementar mejores prácticas en la solicitud presupuestaria por parte de las entidades gubernamentales. Gracias a este esfuerzo, el equipo de la Junta nos dio la oportunidad de liderar la formulación del presupuesto del 2027. La metodología utilizada por parte de la Oficina de Gerencia y Presupuesto se dividió en 5 pasos. Primero, un análisis de tendencias históricas con 3 años de data financiera por agencias. Segundo, un análisis del budget to actual, usando la ejecución en tiempo real del año fiscal 2026, contra los presupuestos certificados y ajustados, accediendo a la información a través de nuestro sistema de inteligencia de datos. Tercero, se hicieron sesiones ejecutivas con las 40 agencias más grandes, que representan más del 85% del presupuesto consolidado del gobierno de Puerto Rico. Cuarto, se hizo una revisión del roster de nómina de manera puntual, que cubrió alrededor de 67.500 empleados en 90 agencias, con un ajuste en 36 de ellas. Y quinto, se pudo hacer una validación de los gastos operacionales y los contratos asociados. Un logro importante para la Oficina de Gerencia y Presupuesto es que, producto del esfuerzo del equipo, por primera vez las metas presupuestarias a la agencia se establecieron desde nuestra oficina, tomando como punto de partida los targets de la Junta. El Sistema de Inteligencia de Datos es la plataforma central de monitoreo fiscal de la OGP. Dentro de las vistas que tiene esta plataforma están las siguientes: monitoreo del budget to actual, analítica de nómina, monitoreo de ingresos del Fondo General y paneles de control ejecutivos. Junto a este sistema, nuestra oficina ahora mismo lanzó un piloto de plataforma de certificación presupuestaria y de la plataforma de los fondos de ingresos propios. Sobre los fondos de ingresos propios, la OGP tenía muy poca visibilidad, por lo que existe una gran mejoría en poder proyectar los ingresos de fondos especiales. De igual manera, estamos integrando elementos de inteligencia artificial que nos ayuden a hacer procesos analíticos y las proyecciones para robustecer el monitoreo del presupuesto. Y sin duda, nos ayudará a la formulación del próximo presupuesto. Es la primera vez que la Junta y el Gobierno han alineado unas guías para desarrollar presupuestos conforme a los estándares de contabilidad modified y accrual. Y naturalmente, ahora nuestras discusiones se enfocarán en la implementación en las próximas semanas. Como saben, esta es la primera vez desde Promesa que el gobierno desarrolla un presupuesto bajo este estándar, y ciertamente la sección 209 de Promesa establece 3 criterios para concluir la supervisión fiscal: 4 presupuestos balanceados consecutivos, alcanzar la responsabilidad fiscal y acceso a los mercados de capital. Definitivamente, el año fiscal 2026 y el presupuesto sometido para el 2027 marcan un antes y un después hacia la dirección correcta. El año fiscal 2027 es el primer ciclo que se apoya en una estructura institucional más amplia ya desarrollada. Cada una de las reformas se encuentra en una etapa distinta de madurez y todas continuarán evolucionando más allá de este ciclo presupuestario. Como deben saber, se creó el Comité Interagencial de Presupuesto, que sigue bien activo y se compone desde nuestra oficina, la FAF, Hacienda, la Junta de Planificación y el Departamento del Trabajo. Definitivamente este comité seguirá operando en los próximos ciclos presupuestarios. De hecho, este comité fue clave para que se pudiera preparar un Master Working Plan del proceso presupuestario. De igual manera, en OGP hemos estado trabajando en una reorganización institucional al crear la División de Análisis Económico y Política Fiscal y la Oficina de Manejo de Subvenciones Federales, la cual monitoreará de cerca el 43% del presupuesto consolidado. Por último, la OGP publicó un manual de presupuesto y una carta presupuestaria que sirvió de base para que las agencias realizaran sus peticiones presupuestarias. Para facilitar su lectura y uso, se publicó un portal del manual presupuestario en nuestra página de internet para que de manera interactiva las agencias pudieran navegar en dicho manual. La próxima página que estamos presentando en la presentación es una evidencia de cómo se ve la parte de los fondos federales y la visibilidad que hemos implementado. OGP continuará con el plan financiero multianual de 5 años. Para ello, el 7 de mayo del 2026, la gobernadora Jennifer González Colón radicó legislación entre los cuerpos legislativos para crear, junto al plan multianual, el Fondo de Estabilización Presupuestaria y el Fondo de Proyectos de Capital y un plan de mejoras permanentes. El Fondo de Estabilización Presupuestaria comenzará con un depósito inicial de 729 millones, el cual representa el 50% del 13.5% de los ingresos netos del Fondo General. Tenemos como metas el poder presentar un borrador del plan financiero a 5 años durante el mes de julio del 2026. Como saben, estuvimos trabajando con el equipo de la Junta sobre las partidas recurrentes, sus usos y sus fuentes, logrando cerrar brechas estructurales en asignaciones presupuestarias y que serán parte del proceso de implementación del plan financiero a 5 años. Luego de esto, el 15 de mayo, el Gobierno y la Junta aprobó someter un presupuesto en cumplimiento a la Asamblea Legislativa. Aún nos queda un camino por completar y es lograr que el presupuesto propuesto sea aprobado y certificado en o antes del 30 de junio. En el corto plazo, la supervisión de ejecución del presupuesto ya está en vigor. Bajo la Carta Circular 009-2025, iniciamos el monitoreo de la ejecución presupuestaria y los dashboards permiten identificar varianzas de manera temprana, que nos permite tomar acción correctiva de forma proactiva. Y durante las próximas semanas nos toca resolver los detalles de implementación de Modify Accrual. A largo plazo, las próximas metas son continuar el despliegue del sistema de inteligencia de datos a agencias adicionales, activar una capa de análisis predictivo con inteligencia artificial y construir la autonomía institucional post-promesa. Cierro con esto. El presupuesto opera como un instrumento de gerencia de desempeño y los cimientos institucionales para sostenerlo se están construyendo. Luego de haber presentado y explicado los cambios estructurales que se están y se han realizado en tan corto tiempo en la Oficina de Gerencia y Presupuesto, los invito a que podamos tener una conversación objetiva para lograr que la OGP comience a ser la entidad que evalúe y apruebe ciertas solicitudes de reprogramaciones presupuestarias y que solo tengamos que notificar a la Junta, específicamente aquella reprogramación presupuestaria que no son de cuantías materiales. Para cerrar, quiero agradecer a todo el equipo de ERISA y a Lisa, al director ejecutivo, a Arnaldo Cruz, al director de AFAF por toda la colaboración que se ha realizado durante este proceso y todos los cambios que se han logrado en tan poco tiempo. Muchas gracias.
Thank you, Ms. Guardiola and Mr. Rivera, for your comprehensive and informative presentation. Any board members wish to ask any questions or make a comment?
I don't want to comment on everything, but I will tell you, as a former budget director of 2 states, this is exciting. Good work. I'm very, very pleased to see the FOMB team with the OJP's team working together on this. This is good for the people of Puerto Rico.
Para mí oírlo en inglés, en español, ha sido no solamente un placer, pero también saber que este esfuerzo es una colaboración entre dos equipos, entre la gobernadora y claro, la Junta. Es de la única forma que vamos a llegar con un plan para saber que esta isla va a tener el éxito que necesita, no solamente para mí personalmente en educación y en términos de sostener los cambios que necesita para que esta isla tenga su éxito.
Thank
Mr. Chairman, just one point of clarification. There's been some discussion about the modified accrual, and obviously, we're hopeful that last year's budget certifies as the first, and hopefully 2027 will follow through and certify as the second budget for the 4 that they're required by 209. But Robert, do you want to just comment briefly on the modified accrual and how we're tracking that?
Yeah. There's 2 provisions of PROMESA that refer to the modified accrual standard. So the first provision is the budget should be submitted under the modified accrual standard, and then that's for submission, so certification that the budget was prepared with that standard. The second is when you determine that the budget was balanced, which is determined at the close of the fiscal year. And at the end of the fiscal year, there's a determination as to whether or not the budget was balanced consistent with modified accrual. So you have to go through the whole year and then make that final determination at the end of the year, which is done through the audited financial statements at the end. The challenge has been that modified accrual standard you can have a strict standard, and it wasn't done. We hadn't reached an agreement on a budgetary basis for modified accrual. And what I said in my remarks, and I think the budget director mentioned as well, is we reached agreements on the guidelines on how you would measure modified accrual going forward. So for the first time, the government submitted the budget, but you couldn't make a determination of whether or not it was consistent with modified accrual because we hadn't reached an agreement on those guidelines. We did reach an agreement on those guidelines. So now we're looking to make sure that the budget that's submitted is consistent with those guidelines. And last year's budget, or the current year's budget, which hasn't closed yet, right, there's a question, was that budget prepared under modified accrual? Difficult to make that determination when you didn't have the guidelines agreed to, but now we do. So now we can go back and look at that budget and make sure it's consistent. There might be some things that are in the guidelines that maybe you couldn't make a determination last year. It's not going to be a disqualifying factor on the submission of whether or not the first budget was balanced. The real issue is going to be at the close of the fiscal year, once you get the audited financial statements, is the current year balanced under modified accrual? And there's no indication that it should not be, right, at this time. And now that we have guidelines for the current year budget, it's easier to make the determination presently, and we hope to do that by the time this budget is certified. So by the time we bring you a budget that's certified, we'll know, because we'll be able to have gone through it. The budget director has gone through it. Now we have to go through it, look at the guidelines, and make sure that it's consistent with the modified accrual guidelines that we have agreed to. That's the first, right, the first standard. And then the second is at the close of the 27 fiscal year. Once we have a certified budget that's passed the legislature, right, then you'll know if that budget's balanced under that modified accrual standard. We've made the guidelines that we've agreed to with the government makes adjustments to it that are reasonable and more consistent with budgeting practices in other jurisdictions that use the modified accrual standard. So it's not necessarily the strict standard that you may use at the close of the fiscal year. It's a little bit of a different standard, but make it clear. Two different things. Is it prepared under modified accrual? And then is it balanced under modified accrual? And both of those. And we have now agreement on the measuring standard to make that determination.
Thank you. So it is a process, but it's working and we're making good headway. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. Thank you, John and Robert. Anyone else? There being no further comments or questions, I'd like to turn the floor over to the Governor's Chief of Staff, Francisco J. Dominici, for an update on the government's Enterprise Resource Planning, or ERP, project. The Oversight Board has long identified the let me get the initials correct. The ERP as a strategic priority for Puerto Rico's fiscal modernization. The Commonwealth has worked for some time to replace its aging financial management systems, a foundational investment in the kind of transparent, accountable, and reliable financial reporting that a post-bankruptcy government requires. I'd like to recognize the leadership by the Governor and her Office of Chief Staff and their sustained effort to push this long-delayed project forward. Thank you, Governor, and your staff. On July 7th, the government said it would be the launch of the finance and supply chain phase, a stage no prior administration has reached. The work is not yet complete, and the Oversight Board will remain closely engaged through the go-live and the phases that follow. The government will now present its progress in detail. Mr. Dominici, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and the Governor. Good morning to the members, and good morning to sorry, much better now. Again, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning to the board members, and good morning to Director Mujica. For everyone is what is the functions systems across approximately 60 governments. For the past 10 years, that the two tables you see up on the screen, phase 1 and phase 2, that are spread out through government, counting in different agencies. The problem with those systems being spread out is that they do not talk to each other, or Hacienda. So we have fragmented accounting, reporting by the government agencies, and it strengthens internal controls and management of public procurement, justify the modernization of its financial management system for nearly a decade across 3 distinct implementation rounds. You can see the 3 rounds up on the screen. All 3 rounds have cost cumulatively $117.8 million since 2017. I want to particularly focus on round 3, which is the one that falls under Governor González Colón's administration. We renegotiated the contract as per the governor's request so that it be restructured with a new phased approach, define milestones, and strengthen governance. It did cost $12 million more, but it added a whole set of principles that all prior contracts where $95 million were spent did not have. It did not have milestones. It did not have accountability. Didn't have any of those things. Governor Gonzalez Colon specifically instructed me to make sure that the new contract reflected those, and that has been part of getting this to actual fruition and that go-live date of July 1st that has been announced by the governor. Briefly going over why the past efforts did not succeed. The independent assessment, including the Puerto Rico Comptroller's Office and the Financial Oversight and Management Board, identified a consistent set of structural challenges across the prior implementation rounds. The restructured approach taken in 2025 by Governor Gonzalez Colon's leadership was designed specifically to address each of these items that were raised, again, by the FOMB and by the Comptroller's Office. Governance and oversight gaps. The steering committee oversight, recurring vendor coordination, stakeholder communication channels were not consistently in place, leading to delays on critical decisions. Inadequate contract specificity. Per the Comptroller's Office audit from October 25 October of 25 to July of 2024, prior contracts lacked detailed task descriptions, defined deliverables, and due dates, making vendor accountability difficult to enforce. Limited agency readiness. Agencies were not consistently provided with dedicated staff, complete data, or contingency planning for key personnel, slowing implementation work at the operational level. Complexity of cross-agency coordination. Foundational decisions required sustained coordination across approximately 60 government entities, magnified by changes in administration and leadership over 8 years within the project span. The new administration approach, starting in July 2025. In the first months in office, again, Governor Gonzalez Colon undertook a comprehensive restructuring of the ERP project in coordination with the Department of the Treasury, Hacienda, the ROMB, which is OGP, and the Financial Oversight Board. First, we renegotiated the vendor contract. The contract was amended throughout its entirety with clear deliverables, defined due dates, and accountability mechanisms as the governor requested. Number two, phased implementation strategy. 2 phases executed in parallel, each with an affirmed go-live date and defined scope. That's why we have a first go-live date now in July and another one in early 2027. Redesigned governance. Complete restructure of the project's governance framework and decision-making process. Number 4, a dedicated ERP team. New contracting and staffing of dedicated government resources for the project that work on a daily basis, and I have to recognize the Deputy Chief of Staff, Attorney Itza Garcia, whom every day leads this project on behalf of Governor Gonzalez Colon. Number 5, weekly stakeholder coordination. Standing weekly meetings with Deloitte and the lead agencies on tactical and critical matters. Cross-entity engagement, active coordination with public corporations, also implementing Oracle Cloud for future integration. Lots of weekly meetings is what we can say. Phased implementation. The ERP is being implemented in 2 simultaneous executed phases, each with a defined scope and go-live date. If you see phase 1, July 2026, and I'm not going to go over all of it, but it's the finance and supply chain module that goes live on July 2026. The phase 2, which will go live in early 2027, is the human capital and payroll. And then in that first quarter, we will finally have a complete integrated fiscal, financial system within the government where everything is being seen, not only by OMB, by the government agencies. The challenges that we had to overcome. The project depends on multiple stakeholders, both public and private, and operates within structural conditions that influence its pace. Three factors in particular have shaped the path to launch. In spite of this, the government's implementation has risen above previously unmatched heights of challenges with the projected launch this summer, and again, in coordination with the FOMB staff. We had to do, again, three things. We had to rebuild the project's credibility. After two prior implementation rounds did not reach completion, skepticism about whether this project would actually launch was understandable. The governor herself had her doubts, and that's why she requested that myself and my office renegotiate fully that contract with the metrics that were put in place. So we had to re-engage agencies, staff, partners, and demonstrate that this round would indeed be different. We had the foundational task of requiring sustained leadership and visible progress at every milestone. Third-party vendor readiness. The ERP depends on a system integrator and a network of third-party providers. Underperformance by third parties, and I must say that the local general services agency was underperforming as well, contributed to delays in prior rounds. Holding each party accountable to define deliverables, milestones, and quality standards is now an active, day-to-day component of project management. Cross-initiative alignment. The ERP intersects with parallel reforms across the government, procurement consolidation, civil service modernization, and fiscal management improvement, aligning the ERP's architecture and timing with adjacent initiative requires ongoing coordination and sequencing decisions. We are on track for the launch in July 2026. Government staff across 29 agencies are now testing the new system in real-world scenarios. User acceptance testings, or UAT, the final stage before launch. Earlier rounds during the past 10 years never reached this point. Governor González Colón's administration is truly making the ERP a reality, and the numbers are there. 96% of planned tests have been completed. That is up from 25% in February. 90% of tests successful. The system is working as expected. 100% of component build, 112 system pieces complete. 29 agencies testing the system, again, in real-world scenarios. In April of 2026, real-world testing, now 96% complete with 90% of tests successful. So this was started back in April. In June of 2026, we will switch over to the new system, which will begin on June 1st ahead of the July 1st launch. And then we expect the first phase, as stated, which includes the finance and procurement to run the new system. The ERP will be a reality. It is an important component, as the executive director of the FOMB stated, of fiscal sound planning, and again, of complying with PROMESA's guidelines of making Puerto Rico fiscally responsible across all government agencies, and more importantly, being able to produce our financial audited reports within what the capital markets expect. With the ERP implemented, we are also on a path to access the capital markets. Thank you to the collaboration of the FOMB, which has been instrumental. Thank you to Governor González Colón for leading this effort with new metrics. And again, I do want to thank the Deputy Chief of Staff, Itza Garcia, for being the project manager of this effort on a daily basis.
Thank you, Mr. Dominique, for your presentation. It's very informative and, of course, very thorough. Would any board member or Mr. Mojica like to comment on the presentation? Come on, John.
I'm glad you said that, because
Only if it's going to be good comments.
This is a good board meeting. This is crap that needs to get done in Puerto Rico, right? I mean, this ERP is going to be a game changer for the government, government, and I really appreciate you. I mean, you need strong governance, you need clear accountability, and you need to get the thing done, okay? I've been part of, in my professional world, part of many systems implementations, and I just want to urge with caution, okay? July 1st is a date, and you work like you know what to stick to that date. But understand that these system implementations do sometimes come with challenges, right? And again, perfect software never ships, right? And so as you do this, I just encourage you to have patience and everybody here to have patience as this is implemented, because there will be challenges as these implementations and as the agencies have to change their business practices, so on and so forth. So I think it's very clear communication, and I really appreciate the leadership that's happening on this project, because this will be a game changer for the future accountability, transparency of the island, its finances.
Thank you, John. Anyone else? There being no further comments or questions, we've concluded the substance of today's meeting. I would like to open the floor to audience questions. If you have a question, please approach the microphone in the center aisle. Please state your name, and please do not exceed 2 minutes for your question. A clock in front of you will indicate the time elapsed.
Good morning. My name is Cristina Cabrera. I'm a former Chief of Staff of the Department of Natural and Environmental Resources, former State Forester, and former Director of the Office of the Coastal Zone Management Program, and a proud daughter of Cesar Cabrera, former Ambassador for the U.S. in Mauritius and Seychelles. Today I come as a parent of autistic twin boys that are awaiting reimbursements from the Department of Education for a specialized school that could provide for their needs. I've been told that there's a reapportionment request that's right now under your purview, under revision, and I've emailed the board to see if this is so. I'm going to take that as at face value that there's a reapportionment request. And I just want to say that the parents of special education students awaiting reimbursements cannot wait until the next budget to get reimbursed. We need that reapportionment attended to so that we can pay our debts and be law-abiding citizens. I'm happy with the system. I think it's a good system that the Department of Education does not have to create these specialized schools and the parents pay in advance and then get reimbursed. I think it's a good system. It's just that the fund continually gets depleted before the semester ends. And I believe there could be something that could be attended to in the next budget, in the sense that there should be a buffer for new cases of autism coming in, because there's better diagnostic tools that are in place now, and the trend of autism going up keeps going. So even though you might have, I heard the presentation that there's an 80 million increase in education, that there'll be a student-based budget, that there's historical trends analysis, and I'm very hopeful that in the next budget, this line item will be increased, in accordance to what you said. But I just want to let you know my opinion that there should be a buffer for new cases coming in, because all over the world, autism is increasing. So we need to address that in the budget so that the fund does not run out and then a reapportionment request has to be made, because for the parents, it's really onerous to be financing this for months and months and months. Thank you.
Understood. Thank you very much for your question. Robert?
If we have the reapportionment request, we'll look at it. Reapportionments, they exist because items weren't properly budgeted for throughout the year, right? And then you have to take a reapportionment request and redo the budget. Constantly refining it so that doesn't happen, because in the ideal situation, you wouldn't have these reapportionment requests are not of that significance. In the area of special ed, this is a recurring issue. It's been occurring every year because there hasn't been sufficient budgeting for all of it. And then there are, policy issues with the program itself that need to be addressed internally, within the department. But we understand, we'll look at the request, and we understand the monies have to be laid out and get reimbursed, and the timing that's associated with that for individual families.
I just wanted to say thank you for addressing the comment. And I'm a Puerto Rican who wants to live in Puerto Rico, and I have had, the tough decision of moving to another jurisdiction where I'm not contributing to the tax base and consulting in federal funds, which is what I do, because I would get the services for my kids, so just reimburse. So I think if we fix this together, and I am very happy that the board is working hand in hand with the government, and just wanted to thank Mr. Mojica for that. Thanks.
Thank you.
So let me just say thank you for your comment. As a former special education, both teacher and principal, the reason I'm on this board, and although from a budgetary situation, Robert and we often talk about, I do manage a very substantial budget. So I'm interested in the fiscal part of this, but my real commitment is that as a commissioner of education and the president of USNY, which is the University of the State of New York, I want to lend my knowledge, my skills, because this island gave me the first 9 years of my life. And so it's giving back. And so I do want to say that one of the key points that I pay attention to, that Robert knows from the very, very beginning, having worked in New York together, is the issue of lifting the education of this island. There's a lot of talent here. There's a lot of work that needs to be done to ensure that people remain on the island, get the quality, high quality education that our children need. And but my absolute interest is that all means all children included in that process as our students with special needs. So thank you.
Thank you, Betty. Anyone else? All right, I see no further questions. I understand we received a number of questions through online comment portal. The Oversight Board will post answers to those questions and comments on the website. All right, that said, does any board member have any other matter to discuss today?
Mr. Chairman, I do have a personal thing I want to mention. I have to say my heart was warmed when I walked in and saw the scout troop sitting back here this morning. I reflected back, it's been 40 years ago that I got my Eagle rank within the scout program, and was just delighted to see Troop 1963 from the Coopeyville School. Maria del Carmen Lopez, who used to be one of our great employees, is the mother of one of these young scouts. And I just want to tell you that they're working on their Citizenship and Society Merit Badge. And I'm sure they just thought the last hour and a half was probably the most boring hour and a half they've sat through. But I want you to know the work that's happening here is to provide a solid foundation for your future. Okay, I want you to understand that Puerto Rico finds itself and found itself in a financial mess. And the work that's being done here is to provide sustainability and a bright future for you scouts to be able to stay here on the island if you wish and have a prosperous life. And so I'd encourage you to always, always, always be engaged and understand that these decisions aren't just theoretical decisions. These decisions impact you and your lives on a daily basis. Okay, so I really appreciate you coming. I know you did it for a merit badge requirement, but again, my heart was warmed when I saw you. They did ask if they could take a picture, and I want to encourage them to come up quickly because we'll maybe grab the governor before she leaves to see if she would be willing to stand in the picture, because you certainly don't want it with us. We know that you want the picture with the governor. So With that, Mr. Chairman, I'll
Thank you, John, and
Mr.
to
Chairman,
our scout.
Mr. Chairman, may I? Sure. For me personally, I just want to say the fact that the leadership, I see the young women. So in my own leadership role, and I know Governor, in your own leadership role, I am so proud of both young men, but also the young women who are providing the kind of leadership that absolutely makes us all smile. Thank you.
And for those of you who didn't think it was that boring, you're more than welcome to come back at any of our meetings. Thank you again for being here. All right. I see no further questions. I'm reading the wrong line. Wait a minute. I have to have somebody
adjourn.
turn me to the right page. All right. What I'd like to do now is I'd like to thank Ms. Mojica and our staff, Governor Gonzalez and her administration, and all of you here for being here in the audience and participating. Since we have no other matters to cover, do I have a motion to adjourn this meeting?
Mr.
so
Chairman.
moved.
So moved.
Second.
All right. All in favor, say yes.
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 Any opposed? Hearing none, all the board members having voted in favor, the meeting is now adjourned. The press conference is to follow. Thank you all. Thank you.
Good morning, board members, executive director, and members of the press. Buenos días a todos. We are going to start our press conference. First question, por aquí, Cyber News.
Dos preguntas. Sobre el presupuesto y los estados financieros auditados. Obviamente, para saber si los presupuestos han estado en cumplimiento, la prueba son los estados financieros auditados. ¿Cómo está el gobierno con el cumplimiento de eso? ¿Y cómo afecta, si algo, la nueva modalidad de este presupuesto que se está utilizando el accrual? Sería la primera pregunta.
Yeah. So the previous budgets, we're still waiting for the audited financial statements, and we don't have anything past 23. I think they're getting closer in finalizing those audited financial statements, but I don't have a date as to when those are going to be finished. The presentation today was partially about the ERP, and when the ERP is in place, as the secretary to the governor said, that should speed up dramatically the ability to prepare the audited financial statements much more quickly and closer to the end of the fiscal year. The budget that the governor submitted last year and that we're presently in, hopefully by the time we get the audited financial statements for that one, it should be in accordance with the modified accrual standards that we recently agreed to this past couple weeks. So we think that should be, unless something else happens for the 26 budget, that should be. And again, using those standards, we can go backwards and apply them to the 26 budget and to see that it was prepared under the modified accrual standards. So what we said last year was that this budget could be the first one and meet those standards, and we think that that's still on track to do that. And then with the budget that's submitted now for 27, since we have the guidelines now, we'll hope to, by the time we certify that budget with the legislature before June 30th, we'll be able to make the determination that that budget was prepared under modified accrual. And then we wait for the audited financial statements at the end of 27 to see where that finally ends up. And again, barring anything that we, unforeseen, that should also be balanced under modified accrual. So last year we said that we're on the same path going forward, and we hope that having an ERP in place in July, as the Secretary to the Governor said, would speed up the fact that we get the audited financial statements, because right now I think we're over 800 days late on getting those audited financial statements.
Ok, antes de la segunda, un seguimiento. Entonces, con los anteriores, cuando se consigan los estados financieros anteriores, ¿es posible que alguno de esos también pueda incluirse como un presupuesto que cualifique bajo la ley promesa para los consecutivos?
Well, they weren't prepared we didn't have modified accrual standards, right? So they weren't prepared on the modified accrual at that time. But we'll see what the audited financial statements show for that. Those budgets were also not prepared by the government, and I think that's also the critical part. The government prepared these budgets, and part of the standard is who's preparing the budgets, putting them together. This is why what we've done over the last 2 years is so important. The government's preparing the budget, the government's preparing them under modified accrual. At the end of the year, they stayed under modified accrual. And the previous ones, if you recall, they were passed, certified by the oversight board that they were in compliance, and then legislature passed legislation which unbalanced them. The board then had to act in order to bring them back into balance, right? So those are not prepared under modified accrual and kept there. The discipline is where we are right now, and I think the legislature understands that, the government understands that. Preparing a budget, passing the budget, and then not knocking it out of balance, a month after it's enacted with new laws that are not consistent with the budget. And that's the path that we're on now, and I think we'll continue along that path, and I think everyone knows. And we've made it, and the point of this is to make it very clear. That's why they're getting the modified accrual guidelines in place, is to make it very clear publicly, these are the guidelines, these are the rules, and then we're making progress to getting there.
Ok, entonces sobre lo que usted habló de la Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica y la situación en lo que persiste como un tranque en la negociación, ¿cuál es el riesgo que habría si entonces la jueza determina que no seguirán con el proceso de mediación y comienza entonces un proceso de como tal de la jueza determinar cuál sería la cuantía de los acreedores, etcétera, etcétera? ¿Cuál sería el riesgo y para la Autoridad de Energía Eléctrica y para el país?
We're moving on both paths right now. So mediation is ongoing, and there's still a path to come to a resolution on mediation, and there's conversations ongoing. And litigation is also ongoing. So the recent decisions show an acceleration in making some determinations so that we can move forward you're moving forward on the litigation side as well. You can achieve a result under both paths. Obviously, if you reach agreement under mediation, that could be done quickly if there's an agreement on the numbers. On the litigation side, that's why we said during our remarks that realistically is going to take longer, and you're looking at another 6 months at least, which is why we don't agree on the litigation side that's going to resolve itself in the current calendar year. I don't know if Arthur had anything to that.
There's always a risk, and you're not going to eliminate that risk. And we are constantly assessing that risk, and I presume the bondholders are doing the same thing. Whether or not we can come to an understanding in assessing that risk, coupled with what we believe could be paid, is something we haven't quite gotten to, where those lines cross, along with what bondholders would be willing to accept. But you can't ignore the risk. And as I say, we constantly have to assess that situation and try to move forward as best we can under the circumstances.
Thank you, Judge and Robert. We have other questions from the members of the press that are online. Kevin Mead from Octus, I know you have a question. Go ahead. You're mute, Kevin, just in case.
Hi, thank you. Mr. Mujica, I'm wondering if you can provide an update on the status of talks with the Gonzalez administration regarding potential sources of Commonwealth funding for a Title III settlement. And sort of a related question, does the PREB rate order that denied massive rate hikes provide headroom for maybe potential future rate hikes to fund a PREPA settlement that may take off some of the pressure you've identified as risk to the Commonwealth budget?
Yeah. So we continue to identify if there are resources within the Commonwealth. We had set aside some money in the last fiscal year for a potential settlement. It doesn't quite get to the $2.6 billion that was in the fiscal plan. But as if there is overperformance revenues or there is spending needs that we don't achieve or that we don't need, we could set some of that money aside for a settlement or to pay the plan. And in terms of the rate order is only 3 years, right? So and you're already 18 months into it. So it really is only in place for a short period of time. There is, right? So within that short period of time, probably is some room in there that is different than the fiscal plan numbers for the remaining parts that are under the rate order. But beyond that, right, the rate order doesn't really impact the longer term rate structure. And it's largely reliance on the deployment of the federal funds. And if you go through the rate order, it's the deployment of the federal funds and then come back to us if those federal funds are not available for the projects you need, and then we will revisit it. So those are the things that we are monitoring, but the short-term part of it is, there's potentially some room there, but there also are other risks within the rates that we're currently monitoring, which include fuel prices, right, and whether or not the current rate order is sufficient for the current operations, and they're still looking at that. And we know there are appeals by Genera on the current rate order, and those are still open.
No, I was just going to mention that the appeal, and I believe its status it's been taken under consideration. I believe that's the current status with respect to PREB and a request made by Genera, and I'm not sure if there was another request. I'd have to go back and look at it. So the bottom line is, it's not, even that rate case in and of itself has not been concluded.
Okay, thank you. Any other question, Kevin?
No, that's it. Thanks.
Okay, thank you. We're moving to vocero.
Sí, buenos días. La pregunta para el señor Mujica. Me puede corregir, pero creo que usted mencionó que todavía hay corporaciones públicas que siguen cuadrando sus números con fondos no recurrentes. No sé si me puede mencionar ejemplos de cuáles y qué recomendaciones, si alguna, le ha dado a la gobernadora y a su administración para poder subsanar, ¿verdad? Eso.
The Water Authority process, one of them, where the fiscal plan depends on rate increases, but it also depends on just new meters coming into place and being able to raise the revenues. And that has been a path to kind of get to make sure that the current year revenues can pay for expenses. But right now, they've been using their reserves in order to fund their operating budgets. That will last one more year, and then their reserves would be depleted. So at that point, they'll have to either change their spending profile to bring it back into balance, or find something else. The governor's administration is now aware of this issue, right? It's relatively new for them. They're aware of the issue. They're looking at the fiscal plans and seeing if there's ways to bring them into compliance. HTA is another one where they're spending one-time funds to maintain balance there. The fiscal plan measures are ways to bring them back in the balance, but they're not the only ways. So if the government has other ways, or if those agencies have different ways to bring their budgets into balance, the board would be open to those too. So the fiscal plan measures are specific to say these are ways that you could bring them into balance. But if you find an alternative way that's recurring to bring the budget into balance, we can look at that as well. The main principle and the concern that we have is that in order to regain access to the credit markets, you're going to have to show that your budgets are balanced and you're able to finance your spending with your current revenue streams. And those are two examples of where we want to raise those concerns today so that they could be addressed today, and it's not something that we're addressing in future years. And people say, these things have not been raised before, you haven't talked about them, they're significant, they're real, and they need to be addressed. And we've publicly made it very clear in our notices of violations that these need to be addressed. We want to make sure the administration knows and the public knows, because that will be a challenge for those agencies to have balanced budgets under modified accrual.
Muchas gracias. Continuamos con Noti1 Radio.
Buenos días, señor Mujica, los miembros de la Junta. Señor Mujica, usted ha estado respondiendo a las preguntas de los colegas sobre los varios caminos que se están trabajando o realizando a la vez en cuanto al tema fiscal de Puerto Rico. ¿En qué momento es que se va a poder, por parte del gobierno, acudir, en este caso, a las casas crediticias? Moody's ha hecho algunas expresiones de algunos lineamientos o de algunos puntos sobre el plan fiscal del gobierno de Puerto Rico en algunos momentos. ¿Cuándo se entiende que ya Puerto Rico puede moverse hacia acudir a las casas crediticias?
Yeah. I think we're making the progress, and that is why earlier today we took a long time, some would say long time, to approve the rebate checks because we wanted to make sure that it didn't send the wrong signal to the credit agencies. And we got to a positive result. We need the legislature to pass those. Everything that we're doing, every piece of legislation, every recommendation that we are making are with that view. How will the credit markets see it? Because we have a main goal is to restore financial responsibility and access to the credit markets. And for the board to terminate, you need both. So we focus on the balanced budgets, and we're getting there on them. We also need to have access to the credit markets, and they need to know that things have actually changed, and Puerto Rico's doing things differently than before. The pieces of legislation that we worked on with the governor demonstrate that if they become law. And they'll show that Puerto Rico has changed. It actually has turned the corner, and we're building reserves. We're building a 5-year capital plan that shows how we're going to finance Puerto Rico's infrastructure without federal funds, because the federal funds will expire. How will you do that? And 5-year plans is something that the credit rating agencies require, and the reserves are something the credit agencies require. These are significant ways that they measure whether or not an entity is credit worthy. Puerto Rico, coming out of bankruptcy, right, has a higher standard, and that's why these permanent structural reforms are important. And what we said today was, it's not just these 3 bills, there are more structural reforms, but that's going to be the key. The key is, when someone comes out of bankruptcy, whether it's a business or another entity, the question really is, how have you changed so that it doesn't happen again? We've balanced the budgets now, we're on that path. We've restructured the debt mostly with exception for PREPA. And these permanent structural reforms are like the final step to show we're going to do things differently, and there are tools in place to prevent this from happening. The credit agencies we know are watching these things, and we're making sure, we're going to Washington, making sure U.S. Treasury is aware of what we're doing. So all of these things are designed really around that.
Muchas gracias. Continuamos acá con Telemundo. Guardiola.
En esa misma línea, Mujica, se puede decir que mientras se mantenga vivo el caso de PREPA, no hay oportunidad de regresar a los mercados para Puerto Rico.
It will be challenging to get access to the credit markets while PREPA is there. But we still have a long way to go, right? We have a few more balanced budgets to do, and PREPA will resolve itself before that as well.
Pregunta sobre ese mismo caso de título 3. ¿La Junta va a insistir en que el caso se ventile en el foro federal? ¿La Junta va a continuar el proceso para conseguir revertir esa decisión de la jueza Taylor Swain?
There are a couple of recent decisions.
Específicamente, ¿cuál caso te refieres?
Bueno, el del remand, el de devolver el caso de la terminación del contrato a las cortes estatales.
We're still reviewing that decision.
¿Cuándo podrían tener una decisión? Todavía no saben.
Not sure yet. I think there is a deadline by which we have to respond, I think in June, and we're still discussing it.
Okay. Dos temas puntuales. Este presupuesto tiene que ser aprobado por la legislatura. Ustedes han planteado, ¿verdad?, que ese paso todavía puede haber unos cambios, y ha habido señalamientos de los legisladores sobre el poco tiempo que tuvieron para mirar esto. ¿Ustedes les parece que eso podría poner en riesgo la certificación de este presupuesto? ¿Piensan que es algo que puede conllevar tales modificaciones que altere lo que han planteado aquí optimistamente, que parece que esperan todo?
We're in contact with the legislature and the legislature leadership. In terms of the calendar, it's very similar to last year's submission. So if you look at the exact dates of when the legislature received last year's budget and when they acted, almost the exact amount of time. That being said, I respect the legislative process and their review, and they have to go through the budget. We're going to work with them for any questions they have, work with OJP to get it done. I believe that we can get it done within the amount of time, and our teams are going to work very hard with the legislature. And they have a right to ask questions, they have concerns, and there may be changes to the budget, and all of those are appropriate as long as they fit within the fiscal framework.
Finalmente, no sé si existe en este presupuesto algún tipo de medida para atender el asunto del aumento desmedido en el costo del combustible a raíz del conflicto con Irán y afuera la gente está un poquito inquieta con esa situación. Aparte de que está la amenaza de que incluso la energía eléctrica pueda aumentar a raíz de esto en la próxima revisión que haga el negociado de energía. ¿Hay algo en el presupuesto? ¿Es un asunto que ustedes han discutido de qué forma se puede paliar, de qué forma se puede atender? Pues lo que ciertamente es un gran costo para mucha gente ahora que entramos en verano, que la gente también hace sus planes, las líneas aéreas, etcétera. ¿Hay algo que ustedes, es algo que ustedes, un tema que ustedes han atendido, que en el presupuesto se refleja de alguna manera?
It's a very real issue that everyone is facing, not just in Puerto Rico, right, across the country, and arguably across the world. Everyone's dealing with. It is one of the things that was in our heads when the board was thinking about the rebate checks, right? That's significant relief that still has not gone out. That's going to go out. That should help with some of the pressure. Nothing in the budget right now is dealing with that right now, but arguably the relief checks and the $554 million in the rebate checks are significant amounts of relief that are going to hit most families in Puerto Rico. And we'll monitor the situation going forward and what the impacts are going to be. At the end of the day, you have a certain amount of revenue and you have a certain amount of budget, and you have to balance those. I think the board came up with a good balance and compromise with finding the resources to fund the $554 million.
¿Alguna otra pregunta por acá? No. The members from that are online, do you have any questions? No? Bueno, if that's so, we conclude our press conference. Muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you all.